everyone, and welcome to China EVs and More, where my co-host, Volleyball Dad Lei Xing, and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV or global EV, AV, and mobility sectors. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. For those that are new to the show, welcome. And to our loyal listeners, welcome back. We ask that you please help us get the word out about this podcast to other enthusiasts. And of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li. I'm the managing director at Sino Auto Insights, a global management consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. Good morning, Lei. Can you please introduce yourself?
Good morning from Boston. This is your co-host, Lei Xing, former chief editor of China Auto Review, and this is episode number 154. Welcome back from our annual break. We're still technically in Chinese New Year because tomorrow is the Lantern Festival.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, they don't go back to work until after that holiday. So the Year of the Dragon, or the Long, as someone would argue, started not with the bang, but with a bloodbath. You remember we talked about Longxing Dada, the dragons flying. Well, the prices, they're flying off everywhere.
Well, they're slashing everywhere.
Slashing everywhere. My goodness. You thought we've seen it all. We haven't seen it all. I mean, starting last year, Tesla was the culprit. And this year, BYD was like, you know what? We're a BUD. We're cheaper than gas. Like, that cracked me up so much because it's a good, who would have known, right? BOD is BYD.
We're not even into March yet, and we know, you and I both talked about how this was going to last well into 2024. So this doesn't surprise anyone. But for BYD to lead the way, that is a little bit of a different tact, I guess, because this is telling the market that you people need to keep up because we're taking share we're going to push out and we're going to take your share. That's what they're telling people.
They're, 4 million units, right? They got to get there somehow. And one way is through a price cut. And basically, I mean, this is because as I was thinking, it's not one model. It's not that one Qin plus DMI Honor. It's a series of models that are launching, right? They just launched the Dolphin Honor at the 100,000 RMB.
And Lei, when you say DMI, that's basically their hybrid.
The plug-in, yeah. That's BYD's, one of BYD's tech. There's quite a few models L coming. I think they're relaunching the Han and the Tang with the L, I believe. And they're launching the Qin L. It's a full wave coming, right? And we're 2 weeks into the Year of the Dragon.
Clearly, BYD's strategy, we have a flavor for every taste in the market. Tesla, are you listening? Because an easy way to make that Model 2, cut the rear end off of the Model 3. Because that's what an L version is, right? You're just adding maybe half a meter of length. And Audi and BMW 10, 12, 15 years ago, they created these L versions of their vehicles. Yeah. Now they're a mainstay of the product portfolio, at least in the China market. So I'm oversimplifying this, but Tesla, how do we get to a Model 2 at $25,000? We take out the rear end of the Model 3. Or, so if they do not get to a Model 2 by mid-2025, China market is likely going to be a huge issue for them, because I'm assuming that 2024, they can still hold off and maintain the right, or let's say close to what they have from a share standpoint. But I don't know if they can do it for 2 years straight.
And it's probably not going to be the $25,000 model. It's cut that price in half. 11,000, 12,000. I mean, that's what the Chin Plus Honor Edition costs, right? $11,000.
And that's what's really important to note, Lei, because the Model 2 is just another car in China. It's a huge victory for them in EU and the US at 25,000, but at 25,000 in China, it's overpriced.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about certain segments, right? It feels like the 79-800. I mean, it's like pocket change.
Yeah.
It feels like that way. I mean, we're all going back to China. I could just, buy one. But obviously, you need to have the license plate.
Yeah,
lottery.
exactly.
But still, I mean, that's.
I still not won that. So, and that was what, 10 years in?
And the chain reaction that followed is, right, all these posters being, right, that the Mazda 3 at the 90,000 RMB, that's an ICE. And Mazda 3, I mean, that's a pretty good, damn nice car. And you won't get that in the US for that type of money.
Well, the other thing too, Lei, I think that's really important to mention is that Buick came out with the Electra 4.
Yeah, the E4 and the E5 at cheaper prices.
So for those wondering if Legacy Auto can come out with cheap vehicles, look at the ID4, look at the ID3 in China. Pricing wise, look at them in Europe, and then look at the United States. So, and then with GM, they're having problems making a $45,000 car or EV in the US, but the Electra E4 is a $23,000 car in China.
It's not a small car. It's like a mid to large SUV. It's probably a Blazer-sized EV.
The unfortunate thing is that 10 years ago, that would have sold well because the Buick brand was strong. But you had mentioned last week that now Cadillac is Buick, yeah. Buick is now Chevrolet. Yeah. So, and Chevrolet is just not even in the conversation.
Yeah, and Buick is basically a business GLA, pretty much. The other sedan models are not resonating.
Yeah, dude. I'm actually looking really forward to going in April because I have a list of cars I want to go check out, drive, visit some people, see how they're doing. Because nothing beats actually talking to employees and checking out morale, see how pumped up they are, see how worried they are. And I think you and I are kind of uniquely suited to do that because we do know the people at a lot of the companies that we're talking about. So,
I mean, there's you talk about the Li Auto Mega, which will launch in a week. The X9, I'm looking forward to maybe try it out. And Xiaomi, just checking out Xiaomi. That's SU7. They're making an announcement there. And Xiaomi is really under a lot of pressure just from one single competitor, which is Geely. And there's a bunch of models Geely's recently launched that's giving Xiaomi a lot of, run for their money. Pricing wise, how do they price the SU7? It's a lot of headache.
Well, you think that? See, I still think it's going to be much cheaper, but you're still thinking it's going to be over 300, right?
No, well, I mean, Lei Jun said it's not going to be 99, 149, or 199. It's going to start probably in the 200s, mid to high 200s. That's what I'm expecting. Yeah, but that could change. Who knows? Like it's Xiaomi, right?
I think if it's not under 250, it doesn't stand a chance.
Because Lei Jun, he keeps saying that, please forgive us that we're going to price this high. But when they launch it, hey, who knows? They might put up a surprise, given the current, bloodbath.
Come on, man. You know that he's one of the biggest showmen in China.
Exactly.
So he's setting the table, basically.
And look at how active he is on Twitter. I know somebody else is running that, but now he's posting most of the EV stuff, right? Because he recently gave part of his responsibilities to the other guy on the phone part of it, right? And he's like, I'm going to be in charge for the EV.
Just as an aside, to tell our audience how everything is kind of sort of interconnected, Shou Ziqu used to be the head of international for Xiaomi in Beijing. And now he is the CEO of TikTok. And he moved back to Singapore. So all of these executives, they know each other. And you and I had a great conversation with Daniel Kirchert about him knowing the William Li Ben and Li Xiang and He Xiaopeng. So the EV executive in China relationship or guanxi is actually, that network is actually very, very small, and it extends out to consumer tech and things like that. So,
and speaking of it, this rivalry between actually Geely and Xiaomi also stems from that, because when Lei Jin, I think he visited a bunch of kind of the incumbents, right, 3 years ago when he started this research into building an EV business, and he poached the director of the R&D Institute of Geely to one of the capital arms. I think it was Shunwei Capital, which is under Xiaomi. And so there's that kind of beef actually going on. I think you can sense it through the recent social media, at least from the model competitive point of view. So it's from all, not only from the price war, but from all points. And now we're, I was talking on CGTN yesterday, and I said, now the biggest change we're seeing is that now we're seeing this tide receding and some of the boats capsizing, one being hi-fi. The good times are over.
I think this points back to, and this is where Xiaomi needs to be very, very, very careful. If we look at the Jiyue, we look at the hi-fi, which were very technology focused to an extreme, we're seeing them not be very successful in the market. Now, hi-fi was also premium, so there's likely a pricing challenge or an issue with them. The X was over $1 million or 800,000 RMB or something like that. Yep. So it was $100,000 US. It was a kitschy, cool car. I think it was very niche because, again, it had lights that you could program to write things. I thought it was kind of cool, but you needed to have a derivative that kind of took out some of the kitschy cool stuff and more mainstream that would have cut the price in half. And I think maybe they had a chance. But if you're not building within a year 10, 12, 15,000 units a month, then you are in a lot of trouble because you're just draining your capital. So
it's pretty much a scale and cost advantage game from here on out, right? I mean, after BYD, after Tesla, who is the next closest to having that kind of scale and cost advantage?
I'm going to make it easy for folks, Lei. Let me explain it this way, and you tell me if you agree or not. Look at their total capacity, multiply that by 80%, maybe 75. If they're not at 75 and consistently at 75, they're likely going to be in trouble in the next quarter, the next 6 months. And then for companies like, well, let's say the companies that are trying to get towards the BYD and the Tesla numbers, they need to get to 60, 70, 80,000 units a month. 80,000 units to be profitable. So
that's
those are kind of the simple back of the envelope math, in my opinion.
Yeah. So Li Auto, last year, a couple of months, they did 50,000 units. And this year they have 800,000 units goal for the year. You can do the math, right? They get there. And I think Hi-Fi Dingley came out. We've seen reports coming out that he held a meeting with the employees. And one of the things he said I thought was really interesting pertaining to one of the tweets I tweeted, that all of these ones that are failing had these founders. And we talked about this with Daniel, with founders who had experience working at the legacy automakers. It could have been a coincidence or there's some bad karma, but he said this, Dingley, he said that my way traditional operational thinking, we could not beat the kind of the internet companies or the founders. That's what he said. Although the product-wise, it was very internet thinking, but maybe operationally or management-wise, there were issues, product planning. I mean, you talked about cutting that price in half. They did. They had to have Hi-Fi Y and they're coming out with Hi-Fi A, but it didn't resonate for some reason because there's the other, the 300,000, 400,000 range that are already taken, let's say, by Li Auto, right? That you succumb to that competition.
And you raise a great point, and let's just throw it out there. So we've interviewed Kristen Lee and Daniel Kirchert. We're going to be launching a video version of our Max episode on YouTube very soon, so stay tuned for that. And I think we could use that, what we talked about, how in the tech companies, how those founders are struggling but not out of business, whereas the companies or the EV startups that were started by automotive executives have all, not all, but largely failed. If we talk about WM Motor, we talk about Hi-Fi, Freeman, X Auto, the Hi-Fi exec.
Yes. Yep.
So maybe that's a warning to the Western automakers. You better bring some strong technology chops and think through your traditional automotive mindset and process and policy driven strategies, and just think about things differently and look at that, because that stands out. Daniel even said it, right? We brought this automotive mindset to BYTON, and ultimately that's probably one of the reasons it failed. So
yeah, and a key reason is the ability to raise capital. I think that's a great point. That the traditional guys, I guess, in that perspective, couldn't compete with the William Lees and the Li Xiangs and the He Xiaopengs, right? They all also, I think he mentioned a great point, that they all had their own capital invested.
Yes,
into these companies initially. They had
their own skin in the game.
Yeah. Although, I mean, we say to this day, the Li Autos, the NIO, the XPeng, they're not out of the woods by any stretch of imagination.
Oh, yeah. We can point to NIO needing a bailout and XPeng getting, a lot of help. But, I had mentioned during our conversation that if you're a tech entrepreneur and you IPO, the banks are happy to help you if you're in a new venture, because you made them a ton of money before. So I think that's also part of the reason, because, I think Daniel is doing very well for himself, but, he'd be the first to tell you he didn't have $100 million to put into BYTON himself, right? So I think he made a great point right there when we talked to him about that stuff. So
yeah. What else is going on? We talked about Hi-Fi. So basically, Ding Lei, he said, we have at most 3 months to turn this around. And you had raised a great point a couple of episodes ago about, now is the time to kick the tires. And I think they're looking at possibly being acquired is definitely one route to go. I think there's some chatter on that, who's going to take up whatever assets is good from Hi-Fi. So if it doesn't survive, maybe it'll be part of somebody else.
Well, I think that's the important thing, because we talked about this Stellantis Renault potential merger, but I didn't see any quick or clear synergies except for just bigger, because Stellantis now has a lifeline via Leap Motor, but Renault doesn't have any such lifeline. So it's important that these companies, whether you're GM, Ford, Hi-Fi has the small network already established in China, has some credibility. It's time to find out if they have any real IP and try to extract value on the cheap, because if you recall, they were number one. The Hi-Fi X was number one in a challenge, an annual challenge or range rating in Norway.
Yeah.
So that would indicate to me that their battery technology is either pretty significant or their BMS. So I would definitely look into that to try to at least try to extract some of that value.
And there's talent, right? Where do these employees, where did they go? There's probably already poaching going on right now. So one of the casualties, as many casualties that we're going to be seeing.
Yeah. Let me see here. You probably didn't, but there was a great article by former Max episode guest John Velker for Inside EVs about the fiasco that is GM Ultium.
I didn't read it, but I saw your tweets, and basically a big part of it is still the culture part of it, right? that correct?
Well, I think because we have to remember that GM, these guys, Ford and stuff, they have dozens, if not hundreds, of hydrogen engineers, battery engineers already. Are they at the level of Tesla engineers or companies like Panasonic and LG? Probably not. But and that I have some moles in GM or some contacts there, and there's a lot of arrogance. Our good friend Alfred is invested in a company that you and I know
Sure.
that helps package battery packs. And GM is using them for Wuling in China, but they decided to go it alone in the US with the Ultium. And so this is like egg on people's face. And there have been some fairly high level. Scott Miller got fired. And I think one of the major reasons for that, Mike Abbott is kind of cleaning house, generally speaking, is what I've been told. And it sounds a lot like what Doug Field has done at Ford. Is it fast enough? Is it deep enough? And are they hiring replacements that are significant enough to move the needle? Because to your point earlier, Lei, culture is just a really, really onerous thing to change when you're a 120-year-old company that's always done things a certain way. So I feel that the Volkswagen groups, the General Motors, the Toyotas, the rank and file are talented enough. Now, let's set aside the software part for a second. But on the battery stuff, I think there's enough talent there to get things right. But the culture thing seems almost as daunting from a challenge standpoint as or changing it or altering it or evolving it, however you want to say that. Because, man, I'm in Detroit. I talk to freaking car guys every day. I talk to car guys that think they're actually pretty progressive. And I say guys because it's always guys. And so I look at them and they know I'm skeptical, but I never really show my full hands because I think that's a little bit disrespectful because I think they're trying to make a difference, right? But unless you're making major decisions at these companies, how much change can you affect?
But at the same time, the recent trends that we've seen, starting out with yesterday, Mercedes-Benz dialing back their 2030 going all electric where market conditions allow. Luckily, they had that qualifier. Otherwise, right, we can dunk on them. We can still dunk on them. But
we should dunk on them because why was that comment even made? It didn't need to be made.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, look at it's Mercedes dialing back, it's Ford dialing back, it's GM dialing back. It seems like everywhere else in the world, there's this, well, including China, because the way I describe it would be China was going 100 miles an hour, while the rest of the world were going at 50 miles an hour. Now China's probably going at 80 miles an hour, while the other ones are now stopped. That's the sense that you get, right? All of a sudden, we're in China. This bloodbath is continue on at all costs, and Jim Farley said, we're not going to participate. We're not going to be in that bloodbath. We're going to go somewhere else.
They haven't been but Lei, they haven't been participating for the better part of 4 or 5 years in the China market.
That's the excuse part of it, right? However you want to spin it, and Mercedes had the excuse also, right? Of we're continuing to where market demand is, we have to be tactical.
So a couple of things that stand out to me now that you talk about Mercedes. During our conversation with Daniel, he said that they were selling hundreds of vehicles a month when he came to BMW in China to lead that team, the sales team or whatever, and they were at 300,000 or 400,000 when he left.
Yeah, so that was in the mid to late 2000s, maybe. So like 20 years ago, roughly.
And he led a decent turnaround at Infiniti before he moved over to BYTON. So to give you all the sense of where ABB is, ABB stands for Audi, Beamer, Benz. They're consistently at around 800,000 units annually. And they take 40% of their profits from the China market. So when Ola said, and I don't know if you saw my tweet, he had been interviewed by Tom McKenzie, a friend, because Tom McKenzie, I don't know if you remember or if you know him, Lei, but he used to live in Beijing.
Yeah.
And he used to do
Bloomberg,
that show. Right. Yep. Now he's in the UK, he's in London, but he was interviewing Ola, and Ola said, and it just stood out, value over volume. And I want us to revisit that end of this year. Let's see, because we have to separate the ICE sales for ABB from the EV sales.
In reality, in China, it's difficult to do that because we already know the Mercedes and the BMW and the Audi dealers, the discounts are pretty significant. The final transactional pricing.
On the EV side.
Yeah. Yeah, it's...
Because this is the thing. Mercedes can't execute on their strategy globally without a strong China market, just like VW Group.
Yeah, and more than likely that next generation MMA, the MB.OS, I think they're probably betting on that, and really the EQ is in the rearview mirror. Whatever performance that they had, that's history, I think. But and then you have also Audi cleaning house, right? Headquarters, even in China. So,
but you still think they're not moving fast enough, correct?
Well, I think in China they're trying to be fast. Volkswagen, right? Speaking of China speed. That's all they talk about in China for China.
So let's do this, because Volkswagen Group, and I know we're kind of getting off topic from the weekly standpoint, but I think it's important to note this. Volkswagen Group Volkswagen brand has about 4% share. Let's say Volkswagen Group has 4% share in the United States. They have about 10% in China and very strong in Europe. But if we look at the pillars of their strength, Europe and China, they're very threatened by China EV Inc. And so if we're thinking about that 80% utilization rate that I'm telling you guys about, then any further significant sales decrease anywhere in Europe or in China, because they don't have the US market to fall back on, they're in a ton of trouble. And I really want to emphasize this, because I feel like journalists are starting to come around to understand the seriousness of Mercedes, of Volkswagen having weak.
I'm nodding my head,
China markets,
as you speak.
So
yeah,
because I don't know, man. I've been talking about this for several years. You as well, about the exposure they have because of the China market. It's starting to clearly come to investors. And not only that, but that there's a ton of pressure on Volkswagen Group to divest out of Xinjiang, right? So
yeah.
The crazy thing is, this is coming from the institutionals. So their shareholders are selling.
And Volkswagen Group does not get that 2%, 3% growth last year in China without the price reductions. And they likely will have to do the same this year.
Yeah.
Because BYD is already shown the way, throwing down the gauntlet. And that's squarely aimed at the Lavidas, the Sagatars, these type of sedans, right? That Volkswagen. Actually, they sell a lot of those. I think in January, actually, in that A segment sedan market, I think Lavito is still number 1 or 2. So think about that, right? And then as we are speaking, Lotus just LOT, $LOT, just rang the bell of NASDAQ.
Nice.
One of the Li Shufu's babies, IPOs. Zeekr is next. Smart is coming.
Lotus is, good friend of China EVs and more. I won't say who it is, but he had gotten an early Lotus in the UK. Wasn't very satisfied with it. Let me just say that. Oh, so the other, really quickly, there's a Bloomberg article that's great.
Yeah, you tweeted, I tweeted as well, of the dependency on China, right?
And it's just the facts.
Yeah.
It's not a position. It's not, it was, because if you look at the byline, there's a Korean journal, there's an American journal, there's a European journal, American journal. So they really did a good job of kind of articulating. And then with the interactive graphics, I thought that was really cool. And this should clearly indicate that the US and Europe can't make affordable EVs without China through 2030. Through 2030. How they're going to reconcile that politically is the question. So
Yeah, and then also just yesterday, I think Neta had a media launch in Mexico. So the other key word I think this year, besides bloodbath, is definitely MXICO. Did I spell that right?
MEX, man.
MEXICO. You're starting.
It's not just that. It's not just that. The battery companies, I was told, are looking at every single country that has a free trade agreement with the United States and are looking at maybe starting operations in those countries.
Yeah.
Everyone. So no stone is being unturned by China Battery Inc. in order to supply what they know will be like if we're at 8% last year, we get to 30, 40, 50% over the next 15 years, we're talking 10 million cars. So, or, 8, 7, 6, 7, 8, 9 million cars a year coming out of the United States that are clean energy. Okay. Now they're going to have to, this puts the domestic battery cell manufacturers, the Panasonics and the LGs who have committed billions of dollars to increase capacity in the United States. This puts them at a huge disadvantage, right? So how that plays out is going to be part political, part, capitalist. Don't know, because we don't know if the Inflation Reduction Act is going to stay the way it is past 2024 until we find out who our next president is. So still a lot of uncertainty, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So the infographic was great, showing especially that part on the Korean, how much of China percent share from the Korean, right? You saw that, right?
Almost everything was in the 90s.
Yeah.
Almost everything was in 90%, over 90%.
Yeah. So how do you perceive that, right? From an IRA point of view?
Yeah. Let's do this, Lei. It's 9:42. We will open the room up to any questions or comments. Lei and I are kind of wiping the Chinese New Year out of our eyes. And one thing I wrote in today's newsletter that I pressed send about 10 minutes before I started the show, is that we're seeing so much news coming out of the US now. It's just really, really challenging. It's quite challenging to keep up. But we have to, because it all fits together like a puzzle.
Yeah.
You can't understand the global market unless you know what's happening in the US and China. Europe, I think
Southeast Asia is, speaking of, EMEA region, Expo launching in UAE.
So for those that aren't sure, EMEA stands for Europe, Middle East, Africa. So that's what EMEA stands for.
And that's where the capital are coming from nowadays. I think there's another investment, I forget which company, that just got money from that region, right?
Yes. Well, Hi-Fi's deal with...
And speaking of Hi-Fi, right, that never went through.
That fell through.
Yeah, it never went through. So
I'm curious to see how the G6 and G9 will be received in Europe specifically, and how aggressive they're going to be on pricing for those products.
Yeah.
Because the Middle East is an emerging market. Vehicle sales aren't that significant, like in the grand scheme of things, from a moving the needle standpoint. Now, if you're an Xpeng or a Neo, a couple thousand more units a month is actually pretty significant, especially in a foreign country. But does Xpeng bring the price war mentality to Europe and aggressively price their Halo vehicles? That'll be the question.
Yeah, I think the price war is, at least here in the US, it's already, US has gotten that fever, right? The price cutting, the Mach-E's, F-150s, Lucids.
Residuals are getting trashed, by the way.
Yeah, it's all over the world now. Here's
my bold statement, Lei. If the Model Y in the United States gets reduced any further, I'm going to get one.
Action speaks louder than words, man.
I know, because like it's right on the cusp of being at the price I want it to be at, and so it's an interesting time because I could get one of those Hertz Model 3s.
You're gonna lease or you're gonna buy? Because if you lease, you get the 7,500.
I'd probably lease,
Yeah.
and then drive it for a couple years.
I'm paying $550 a month for my Santa Fe hybrid, and you can get a theoretically Tesla for $329 a month.
Yeah,
It's a
but
different,
that's with like $3,500 $3,500 down and all this other stuff.
I'm
So
paying off a loan, so I'm not leasing, but still.
and I have employee discount at Stellantis and GM.
Oh,
I can get
nice.
supplier discount at Ford. So I'm looking at pricing a little bit differently than you are, right? But you let me know if you need discounts at any of those companies. Maybe we can figure something out for you. But anyways, the other last thing that I kind of wanted to mention, Scout.
Yeah, they just broke ground, right? So we haven't heard much.
So let me read this to you real quick. My little statement here. Can Scout go where VW hasn't? This is what I wrote in the newsletter. While China has dedicated NEV brands, and I might need to take a breath while I'm reading this. While China has dedicated NEV brands like NIO, XPeng, Li Auto, BYD, Aito, Fangchongbao, Jiyue, Lotus, Zeekr, GACI, Yangwang, Neta, Leap Motor, Avatar, Series, Voya, Shenlan, Geometry, Wuling, Polestar, just to name a few off the top of my head. The US has Rivian, Lucid, and Tesla.
Fisker, which is
Well, yeah. So, I mean, just think of that contrast, right? And I thought of those companies literally like just as I was typing. I didn't do any research like, oh, where are all these companies? Just off the top of my head. So we definitely need more competition. And I just don't know, because if there's been a lot of conversations about Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they don't know who Scout is. And Volkswagen Group, as I said before, they have 4% share in the United States. Scout is not going to double their share. Volkswagen brand is probably the only way they get to 10%, that goal of 10% that they've had by 2030 that they've articulated. But the only way they get to that 10% is if they start selling $25,000, $30,000 ID3s and ID4s, which they are not currently. So it doesn't look like there's any questions, Lay, and I don't really have anything else.
Well, then just, the housekeeping, we mentioned Kristen Lee and Daniel Kirchert. So respectively, Kristen Lee is the transportation editor for Motor Trend.
The senior video.
Well, let's just say editor.
Senior editor or something like that.
Which recently put out a documentary on China EVs, autos, for that matter, in Mexico. And we talked to her. And after that, 2 days ago, we spoke to Dr. Daniel Kirchert. It
was so nice talking to him,
Yeah.
So nice talking to him.
He's the founder of BYTON, one of the early casualties. And he's still in the China EV movement involved. So stay tuned for those Max episodes.
I know you listeners are all EV nerds. So Daniel he speaks the truth in the good and the bad of what's going on. And he's gone and done it. He's one of the people that launched an EV brand in China, one of the first. He's an OG, and he should be much more recognized than he is. And part of the reason you and I reached out to Kristen and Daniel, first of all, Daniel's a friend, so anytime we talk to him is great. But they're out there getting it done. Kristen spent 3 days or 4 days in Mexico meeting with all these people. She told us a story about how the flight was delayed. And so just like you and me, Lay, we're out there getting it done. We're out there visiting. We're out there driving. We're out there talking. We're out there traveling to places. And so it's important to separate the people like me, you, Daniel, and Kristen from the people that are just sitting on the sidelines, reading what we write, listening to what we say, and then getting quoted off of their quote unquote thoughts. I think it's important to separate those two. So that's why we stood them up. Number one, because they're interesting. They have a perspective and a story to tell. And number two, they're out there really getting it done. I'm jumping off my soapbox. Enjoy the rest of Lunar New Year, Chinese New Year Lantern Festival, and the Boston volleyball tournament, Volleyball Dad.
3 days, man.
We will try to get out Kristen's video and podcast next week. And that's all for me.
Yep, and looking forward, so this weekend, actually next Monday, is the Geneva Motor Show, and there'll be MG and BYD, Renault in some sense, the new Dacia Spring, all China related. We'll talk about that. And then next Friday, which is March 1st, is when Li Auto launches and probably delivers the Mega. And I think there's another, one of these big three is having their Q4 earnings call. Could be Li Xiang, I think, next week. We'll talk about those.
And Li Auto has had some pretty interesting adverts, social media, to promote the Mega. So it's pretty cool. I want to see it in real life because it is definitely a wedge shape. So think of almost like a Cybertruck and a Prius had a baby.
And they're doing test drives in Sanya right now. And in the videos I've seen, these things are low riders. They're very low to the ground for some reason. Yeah.
That's because they're BEVs, right? Everyone, thanks for joining. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We will talk with you all next week.
Bye-bye.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Li, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.